Welcome, 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 everyone. We are so honored to have you here in our virtual ceremony, Home and Belonging, a virtual Holocaust Remembrance ceremony. For all of you who are experiencing the virtual webinar for the first time, you see us, but we don't see you. So we will wait for our clerk secretary to let us know when we should begin as our participants enter the virtual room. We all imagine that you're smiling and are excited about today's events. We are certainly excited. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's Viktor Frankl. Good evening. Again, we are no less than inspired by our past and present leadership of the town, who has contributed to understand the importance of having a charge that focuses simply on humanity, the Bloomfield Humanities Committee. A committee that is keeping at the forefront of its mission and the steadfast desire to build community. No matter gender, sexual orientation, racial or ethnic characteristics, and or religious affiliation, we are community. Mayor Wong appointed this ad hoc committee to ensure that these ideals flourish. Our current members are Damian Coachman, Lorraine DeBeetham, Stephen Dabrowski, Tolly Miller, David Ruins, and Barbara Williams. And leading our organization and keeping us in line is our clerk recording secretary, Lynn Wiesel. Just want to acknowledge all of the participants that are here, but all of the community residents that are here. I want to take time to welcome any honorable guests that are in the room today. And we acknowledge that it's right after work, people may be running late. So if I happen to stop in the middle of a commentary to acknowledge our honorable guests, just know it's part of protocol. During our sitting year, we'll be bringing awareness to our community by not only showcasing our community, but reminding you, the Bloomfield resident, why you picked the most beautiful town in Connecticut to live, love, and bloom. Does that sound a little dramatic? I believe that with all my heart, all my heart. Today, we're going to connect our virtual hearts as we commemorate our ancestors who are no longer here and celebrate the survivors of a horrific period of time, the Holocaust. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl was on the reading list when I went to Bloomfield High School. I'm not going to tell you when. Well, maybe I'll just suggest sometime in the 80s. And we had to read that book. It was one of the most substantial pieces of literature that I kept the principalities of that remarkable book in my head. The reading theme that sometimes there's a psychological mutation that occurs in survivors' hearts and minds that drives them to participate in measures of resilience and empowerment that ensures that horrible hacks don't ever happen again. Today, we have a survivor who has exemplified that. She's given her life to education and ensuring that people respect diversity and they are informed about the horrible act of the Holocaust and is empowered to educate people so it won't happen again. We were honored to have one of our committee members reach out to our community organizations, Kimberly Bolero, who I believe Ms. Ruth explained was in Germany. She's the director of the Hero Center, the Holocaust Education Resource and Outreach Center, which is a joint initiative between the Voices of Hope and Maurice Greenberg Center for Judaic Studies. Ms. Bolero reintroduced myself to Ms. Ruth, but she is no stranger to Bloomfield. So just want to take a moment to find out, have we had any dignitaries that have entered the virtual room?
Not at this point.
All right. So as you look at our panelists, we have another pillar of the Bloomfield community. He's been practicing law longer than I've been on this earth. He served as deputy mayor, the council chair of the state Connecticut for multiple District 23 Lions Club International. He's a past president of the Bloomfield Lions Club. He's a past president of the Connecticut's Lions Eye Research Foundation. He's a past president of the well-renowned Beth Hillel Synagogue. He's an officer and director of many other organizations such as the Spanish American Merchants Association, Neighborhood Legal Services, past chairman of the Bloomfield Ethics Committee. He also represents community organizations such as the West Indian Social Club of Hartford, the West Indian Foundation Incorporated, the Connecticut Puerto Rican Forum, and the list goes on and on and on, too many to name. You might see him at the neighborhood library, a neighborhood cookout, the Smithsonian Institute. You might anywhere in Connecticut, you will see this pillar. He has 7 adult children, 13 grandchildren, 2 other great grandchildren, and we all know his significant beloved other who has transitioned Abba. But most notably today, he used to be the neighbor and good friend of our guest speaker. I want to introduce to you the Honorable Mayor Sidney Shulman.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. And I appreciate your words. And good morning, everybody. I have the distinct honor and privilege today to introduce our guest speaker. Our guest speaker and I have known each other for approximately 160 years, or something like that anyway. And as was stated, approximately 45 years ago, or maybe less, a little bit less than that, we were neighbors. As a matter of fact, we were such neighbors and good friends that our guest speaker and her husband were kind enough to take in my daughter for a day or two when she ran away from home when she was a little kid. So I have to tell you that my experience and my involvement with our guest speaker, Ruth Weiner, has been absolutely wonderful. And I hope we can go on for another 160 years. A couple of things I didn't know about Ruth is that she was born in Vienna, Austria, that she was born back at the time before the Nazis took over. And, you know, one of our sayings is, we shall never forget, we will always remember. She suffered many of the atrocities that were perpetrated on people, on Jews throughout the Europe by the Nazis, including the effects of Kristallnacht and some of the other and imprisonment. Now, I would also tell you that she was fortunate enough to escape from Austria through the Kindertransport, which was a special methodology of taking the children, Jewish children, and getting them to England. But then she was even more fortunate in reuniting with her parents in order to come to the United States as a refugee. I didn't know that about her when we were commiserating with one another about our families many years ago. But she, through that suffering, she developed an extreme passion for people, for the diversity of people, for the equal treatment of all people, and for the progression of our entire community, to recognize the value of each person that exists on this planet. And so, with no further ado, I would like to introduce to you a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother who still lives in Bloomfield, my friend over many, many years, Ruth Weiner. Thank you.
Wow. It's been a total pleasure to interact with everyone that I've had the opportunity to meet. And it's more than a total pleasure in putting this event together. And it's more than a pleasure to be introduced by an old friend like Mayor Schulman. And I will do my best to live up to his description of me. But the feeling that I've had in working with this effort is only in Bloomfield, that the kind of empathy, the kind of sensitivity, the kind of concern that a town should undertake to commemorate something that happened 78 years ago and truly understand what it was all about, I have to think is a very rare event. And yes, am I surprised that Bloomfield is the town that does it? No, I am not, because that is who we are. And what I'm going to do this evening is not give you a speech, not give you a lecture on the events of the Holocaust, but simply to share with you some comments about different things, and to try to explain why that, for me, as both a survivor and a very dedicated citizen of Bloomfield, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. Let me begin by asking you that if you've ever been to Washington as a tourist, and if you have, you've probably had the opportunity to visit all of the wonderful museums that are scattered around or in a circle around the mall. And most of them are places where you acquire new knowledge and you can have a wonderful time seeing beauty, seeing interesting things, finding fun stuff for your kids to do. There used to be just one museum, which was anything but. Now there are two, with the advent of the Black History Museum, which unfortunately I have not had the opportunity to see yet. But if you've had an opportunity to go, or if you have not had an opportunity to go to the, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have a cold. I hope I'm not going to be doing too much of this. If you ever have the opportunity to go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum, absolutely take it and go prepared to be moved in ways that you never have before. It is not a fun experience. It is the only museum you'll ever visit that has a railroad car, a freight car, built into the middle of it. And that freight car is a holy space. Why? Because it is an actual freight car that was used to transport Jews from various parts of Europe to the concentration camps. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And when they put together the contents of the museum, they all said, we've got to get that streetcar in there. And the architect said, you can't do that. There's no way that you can get a freight car into a building. And the answer was that we'll build the building around the freight car. And that to me has always been kind of the watchword for how do you teach Holocaust. If it doesn't fit what you're doing, then you fit what you're doing around the teaching of the Holocaust because it's sacred space. This was very well understood by President Dwight Eisenhower, formerly the general who crafted the victory in Europe in World War II. Because as you enter the building, there's a large stone inscription, and I'm going to read it to you verbatim. He says, "The things I saw beggar description. The visual evidence and the verbal testimony of starvation, cruelty, and bestiality were so overpowering. I made the visit to the camp deliberately in order to be in a position to give firsthand evidence of these things if ever in the future there develops a tendency to change these allegations or to charge that they are propaganda." The first time I saw that, I just shrugged my shoulders and I said, well, General, this is, you don't have to worry about that. This is established history. Today we live in times, and I think this is the first thought that I'd like to leave with you. We live in times where that is indeed happening. And in preparing for my remarks today, I read all kinds of stuff, including some reports from the Anti-Defamation League, who referenced me to something called the Goyim Defense League. And sure enough, there you find it, and you find it in other groups. And they're avid, dedicated statements countering the existence of the Holocaust. And this is what tonight is about. It is a repetition of the various things that happened. Let me spend a couple of minutes talking about the uniqueness of the event. A whole new vocabulary had to be created when it became clear what the outcome of the Nazi effort to eliminate the Jewish people. They were not out to eliminate some Jewish people, they were out to eliminate all of the Jewish people. And what they did is they began very slowly and very casually by developing their own political power. Let me divert for a moment. There was mention earlier by Meredith of having read Viktor Frankl when she was in school. Around that same time, we had programs in the school that included various people who talked about the Holocaust. And one of them was a fascinating pair. They called themselves the Odd Couple, but in the best possible way. Who were they? They were a beautiful woman by the name of Sonia Schreiber-Weitz, W-E-I-T-Z, and her companion, I am so sorry to say, I couldn't remember his name. And I remembered them at 3 o'clock in the morning and had not even planned on including them, but I'm happy that I remember them because he was a minister who had lost one arm in World War II. Just the most charming, the most sensitive, the nicest man you would ever want to meet. And he was the person who had liberated her, who had come to the camp where she was. It was called Mauthausen, and had been able to liberate her. I will hold it up and show it to you. This is the book. She wrote a book about her experiences, and we are going to make access to this book available later. I just want to mention that. She wrote very early in her time a book called, a poem called How Could We Know? And I'm going to read it to you because it really sets the scene for the story that I'm about to tell you. How could we know? How could we know what danger signs? We watched the clouds and heard the thunder near until the lightning struck and darkness fell. But that was yesteryear. And that really sums up. I don't think anyone, least of all the people who were the most affected, which was the Jewish community, could predict that when Hitler worked his way into usurping power in Germany, that what would happen very quickly would be that he would have a whole country supporting him in what would be the annihilation, the murder of a whole people. And he came close to succeeding. At the time, there were about 18 million Jews in the whole world, 18 million. He managed to murder 6 million of them, 6 million of them. And that is the kind of number that's very hard to imagine. So I'm going to try to help you. Please do this little exercise with me. We live in New England. So would you imagine the map of New England? And if you have friends or relatives who live in other states in New England, place them where they are. Okay. Here's what I'd like you to do. Imagine, first of all, that absolutely everybody you know in Connecticut, everyone, has been murdered. And not only the people that you know, but every other citizen of Connecticut, man, woman, and child. And the demography works, okay? Because that's exactly what Hitler did. But that's not nearly close to 6 million. You would have to have every man, woman, and child murdered in Rhode Island. You would then have to move to Vermont, to New Hampshire, to Maine. You still would not have the full 6 million. You'd have to borrow some from Massachusetts. That was the net result of the Holocaust, okay? 6 million Jews were murdered, and there is no other word for it. I know they sometimes use the word exterminated. I never use it. I never use it. That is something that you do to undesirable animals, not to people. Now, there are people who survived, and I'm going to read you a poem that she wrote. This is now Sonia White's, who is the survivor of not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 different camps. And I will make a personal comment. She was a very beautiful woman. And that, I think, had something to do with the fact that she survived. It also means that her experience was the worst of the worst. Here is her take on it. I promised I would tell the world, but where to find the words to speak of innocence and love and tell how much it hurts. About those faces, weak and pale, those dizzy eyes around and countless lips that whispered help, but never made a sound. To tell about the loss, the grief, the dread of death and cold of wickedness, of misery. Oh no, it can't be told. And she wrote that because for a long time she was unable to speak of it any further. Speaking of it became very difficult. The word Holocaust had to be invented. And I would like to make a personal comment here, and it's this. The Holocaust was a genocide. It's a word that needs to be preserved for that genocide and only that genocide. And I'll explain why. Genocides are horrible. Please do not take this as an assumption that I think, well, you know, the other genocides are okay, but this is a really bad one. Okay? That is not at all how I feel. But for the other genocides, if as a teacher, you try someone, or even someone who's just trying to explain it, you try to somehow rationalize it in ways that the facts can be learned, in ways that the facts can make some sense. Okay, let's take Rwanda as an example. Horrible, absolutely horrible. But yes, there was a tribal enmity there that didn't just happen. It came into being around some current issues, but it had existed. You could do that for just about every genocide that we think about today, that it's either historic or territorial or political or a mad power grab that's geographic. We're looking at one now, okay? But there is some kind of a rational explanation. There is no rational explanation for the destruction of a whole people. The Jewish people have certain elements that we share in common. But if you ever want to see the diversity of the Jewish people, all you have to do is get on a bus in Israel somewhere, get on a bus in Tel Aviv, get on a bus in Haifa. You cannot tell who's Jewish, you cannot tell who's Arab, you cannot tell who's Christian, you cannot tell where people come from, okay? They are Black, and I mean Black. I worked, we lived in Israel for a period of time to work, and I worked with a group of children that came from Cochin, India. They were truly Black, not shades of brown, Black. And they were Jewish. They prayed the same prayers that I did. What possible reason is there for wiping out everybody like that? Let me talk just a little bit about my own story. Let me fit that in. I was born, as the mayor pointed out, in Vienna in 1931, which was a period of calm and economic stability. I'll save you the arithmetic. I am at the moment 91. If I can make it through next month, I will be 92. So as you can see, I was a child when all of this began to happen. And it was a time when Austria was not thriving, but it was doing okay. And it was a wonderful place to grow up, rich in culture, beautiful. I had a wonderful family. I was an only child. My father was one of 9, so I had lots of aunts and uncles. And that I did not wind up as the world's most spoiled brat is only due to my mother, who was very strict. Because I just had all of the love and all of the attention, and all kinds of really uh, privileges that someone growing up in a beautiful cultured city has. All of that ended literally overnight in 1938 when Hitler marched in, and overnight you saw uh, all over, and Vienna had beautiful buildings, and all of the public buildings, red bunting with swastikas, people marching. All of a sudden you had not only the people marching in from Germany, who were mainly the SS in their black uniforms with the emblem of lightning on their collars. You had locals who had joined the party. It was an overnight shock. Uh, and what happened, and I believe that most Holocaust survivors will tell you that they've had the same experience. What happens is that your whole life changes in an instant. It's like somebody waved a wand, and within 48 hours, your childhood is out the window. Why? Because you have to learn to accommodate for all kinds of dangers in the street, Jews being stopped, being harassed, being tortured, being made, and just even children and old people being made to scrub the sidewalk with all kinds of strange things, with toothbrushes, with their bare hands. There was something called Jewish nail polish. And what was Jewish nail polish? It was when somebody had to scrub with their fingers, which of course created bloody fingertips, and just many, many things like that. I will tell you very briefly about the experience that defined for me the huge change that had taken place in my life. I loved school. I was a good student. I had learned how to read because German is a phonetically reliable language. And once you know your alphabet, you know how to read. It's like putting Lego blocks together. And I learned how to read when I was about 4. And so when I got to first grade, I kind of knew what I was supposed to know. And yes, I will admit it, I was teacher's pet. And as teacher's pet, one of my girlfriends fell, broke her arm, had her arm in this huge plaster cast, stiff as could be, and needed somebody to do everything for her. And no surprise, the teacher said, Ruth, would you, be her aide? And I was, and we became great friends. One morning, I come to school and I help her get out of her coat, and she kicks me, and then she spits in my face. And I can tell you that I can feel that to this day, what that felt like. And of course, I was very upset. And I said, why did you do that? And she says to me, you are a Jewish pig. And the teacher, very good teacher, she immediately intervened, put somebody else in charge of my friend Kitty, and explained to me Kitty didn't really mean that. And she just said it. Well, I knew she hadn't just said it. When I came home, my father sat me down and he explained to me what had just happened. And that probably her family had joined the Nazi party, and that was what my life was going to be from that point on. It was indeed, because very shortly thereafter, Jewish children were no longer allowed to attend school, and we had to go by way of 2 trolley cars where we changed to a Jewish school I will try to wind this story up because I know we need to move into some other things. And we were two little girls. I had a good friend who lived in the same neighborhood, and we traveled by ourselves for an hour and then walked on the two trolley cars. Then we walked for another 15 minutes to the school. The school was almost always surrounded by hoodlums, and we had to make our way through that, shouting vile things. It was a Jewish school. And on a regular basis, they would pick up the paving stones of the street and heave them through the windows. So we learned to sit 2 or 3 to 1 seat on the far side of the room. And only once did somebody get hurt from a stone going through the windows, just something that we were used to. So that was my childhood. I won't have time to go into Kristallnacht right now, but later on, if you're interested, ask me and I will tell you that story. I'd like to go back to Sonia for a moment, because let me explain one more thing. The way that I escaped was through something called the Kindertransport. The Kindertransport was, to their everlasting good grace, the British were willing to accept Jewish children. There was a group of English Jews who understood what was going on and what the outcome was going to be, and who said, we have these summer camps and we have some schools. If we can get the British government to accept Jewish children, and if we can get the parents to give up their children in the interest of saving their lives, we could do this. And as I said, to the very good name of the British government, they agreed. And not only did they agree, but when they ran low on Jewish families, there were non-Jewish families who said, we'll take a kid. And that was just a huge commitment. They had no idea who these kids were going to be. They might be wonderful and they might be very difficult, but they would agree. And there were people who arranged with the Jewish community in Vienna, and there were 2 transports. And it's quite well known. There's a lot written about it, and I would strongly urge you to read about it. It's an amazing story of kids who were sent by their parents. They never saw them again, who were sent by their parents to British families. And in my case, I was very fortunate. I was not able to go on a transport. It was too late. But I was able to get to England, and I had a family that took me. But where I was doubly fortunate was that my mother was able to come to England as a housemaid. They had a special domestic servant visa for Jewish women. And my father, who had been in prison as a political prisoner, was able to bribe the proper British official, and they were willing to bring him into. So eventually, we were reunited in England, and all came together. Let me, as an end to my remarks, give you not my own story, but read you something that every time I read it, it gives me a chill, and I apologize if it gives you one, but it is so beautiful. It is so beautiful. I told you that Sonia and the minister worked together as a team to do Holocaust education. Why? He was the soldier who liberated her. And this is the poem that she wrote about him. It's called My Black Messiah. A black GI stood by the door. I never saw a black before. He'll set me free before I die, I thought. He must be the Messiah. A black Messiah came for me. He stared with eyes that didn't see. He never heard a single word which hung absurd upon my tongue. And then he simply froze in place, the shock, the horror on his face. He didn't weep, he didn't cry, but deep within his gentle eye, a flood of devastating pain, his innocence forever slain. For me, with yet another dawn, I found my black Messiah gone, and on we went our separate ways for many years without a trace. But now there's a special bond we share, which has grown strong because we dare to live, to hope, to smile, and yet we vow not ever to forget. That's the thought I would like to end with. Okay.
That that is chilling and remarkable, and such a wonderful, compelling story with a story of love. Um, love and diversity, it sounds like, which is one of the motivating pinnacles of the Bloomfield Humanities Committee. We thank you so much, Ms. Ruth, for sharing your story. And we wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions that they may feel charged to ask. Please feel free. Ms. Ruth is very versed in this. She's been doing it for many years. So she is open and willing to answer any question, and any question that she's not, any question that she isn't comfortable with, she will be able to articulate that. So please field your questions in the Q&A chat, and they will be filtered by Lynn Weisel, who will be giving the questions to Ms. Ruth. So we have some questions already identified, but again, we are offering an opportunity for open questions, and please place those in the chat. So we also want to be able to acknowledge our dignitaries that have come in. We have the Honorable Mayor Wong present, and again, we acknowledge those who are here. So good evening, Mayor Wong. And we will start those questions. Lynn?
The first question is, Mayor Schulman mentioned that he wasn't aware of some of your early experiences, and it made us wonder how and when you've decided to share your story.
Okay. It's interesting when he said that. And yeah, it's true. And the reason for that is not that I haven't shared my story. I began talking, and it was really very funny. I began talking literally a couple of weeks. I was a young girl. A couple of weeks after I came to America, and a church group invited me, would I come and talk to them about Christmas in Austria? And they knew I was Jewish, but that didn't stop me at all, because I had experienced it, and I had experience with friends, and I was happy to talk about it. But it was not Holocaust, okay? And as an educator, I have always talked about the Holocaust, both with, of course, with Jewish groups, And I have gone out of my way and do to this day to share this, because I feel, you know, as Sonia expresses in her poetry, I feel that this is something of a nature. I guess you could use the word in a negative context too, of a nature that can't be ignored, that has to be kept in public awareness, because you know, I'm often asked, do I think that it could repeat itself? And my feeling is yes, it absolutely could, because everyone felt it couldn't, nothing like that could ever happen the first time, and it did. And particularly with many of the things, I mean, is it going to repeat itself in exactly the same format? No, we live in a very different world. But does that world have some of the same elements in it? I'm very much afraid that it does, yes. And have people dramatically changed? No, I don't think they have. So does it need to be talked about? Yes. And have I always talked about it? Also, yes. But if you come to my house for, unless you're here to talk about the Holocaust, it is not what I would be talking about. You know, I will certainly be talking about my great grandchildren. I would be talking about Bloomfield. I would be talking about maybe politics, if that's what you're interested in. But it, you know, it just, I think it, all right, let me digress just for a moment, because I think this is worth saying. Holocaust survivors tend to operate in two categories, particularly those, and you can differentiate between those who have survived the concentration camps, and that's a whole different experience. I mean, I can't say this often enough. I was very fortunate, very fortunate that I was spared all of that, partly because of my age, and partly because the time that I was there, I left before the death camps and the feeding of the death camps had been instituted. Had I been there a little bit longer, I know exactly where I would have ended up, okay, but I did not. And for people who experience that, they are more likely to be in the first category. And the first category is that everything is completely suppressed. Okay, they do not talk about it. And I have a friend who a very intelligent woman in every respect. She was in my school, the Jewish school, and also left as a second grader. Okay, she does not remember a word of German. Truly does not remember a word of German, because she has suppressed it. Why has she suppressed it? She left alone, was never reunited with her family. And that was her way of dealing with it. So you do find people who cannot talk about it. And whoever asked the question, I think that's a wonderful question, because you know, there needs to be that level of sensitivity, and people will indicate very quickly if they're willing to talk about it. And then there are other people like myself who don't love talking about it. I don't. It's difficult for me every time I do it. But I feel that there is a need to have that presented as part of the public discourse, and for sure with a group like this group, where you know, there's concern. Who are we as a community? What values do we express? Who do we see as partners in our community? Those were all elements that you know, the Holocaust addresses. I hope that answers the question of the questionnaire, and if it doesn't, let me know.
So we have a couple comments in the chat. The first one talks about going to the memorial and the museum in DC. They say they took 2 days to cover the facility and still felt the need to go back and see what they may have missed. They say you could have heard a pin drop as they walked through the exhibits in total awe. And then
Let
another,
me make a comment on that. They've done a wonderful job. If you ever are interested in any kind of fact finding, that's your address. Holocaust Memorial Museum. They've got a wonderful website with every imaginable resource that you might want. A question that I'm often asked is, should you take children there? Okay. And my unequivocal answer is yes, you should. I think it's a very important place to take children. But let me be a little bit more specific about that. First of all, they have an area for kids, which is designed that you could take if you've got a verbal, inquisitive second grader, they can handle it. Okay, it is not something that overwhelms them. For slightly older children, if you've ever discussed death with them, if you haven't, you probably should, but that's another comment. But that they understand that this is not going to be a happy place. This is going to be a place where they learn about some sad things. And they learn about some terrible things that people can do to each other. But I would say that you can start with definitely, and again, I hate to be generic because it depends on on the kid. But I've been in 4th and 5th grade and asked questions like, were any members of your family killed in a concentration camp? And if so, how were they killed? And if I tell you that the most shocking question that I've ever had was from a 3rd grader who asked me, was anybody in my family ever killed by being placed in the back of a truck, which had the exhaust feeding into the truck. This was a truck that was designed by a Swiss truck manufacturer. And it was the one question I very rarely get a question I can't answer. I couldn't answer it because yes, my grandfather died that way. And this came from a 3rd grader and he knew about that. So I think something that we need to recognize is that it's out there. The kids hear about it. The last thing you want is for them to hear about it in the wrong way from the wrong people. So if you're the kind of parent or teacher who believes in taking kids to museums and then having that be a meaningful experience, by all means, yes, take them to the Holocaust Museum.
I'm going to go ahead and let folks into the room so that Miss Ruth can see you. We have another comment here. It says, "Thank you, Ruth. We honor you for your words and sharing your stories with us. Never again is so important for us not to forget." And then another question is how, over time, especially as you talk so much about your experiences and about the Holocaust, how do you not become callous? And how do you protect yourself?
It's an interesting question. I have to tell you, I don't think I've ever had a year of my life that I wasn't involved in some way in speaking about this. I've spoken to churches. You know, I do synagogues and Jewish groups. I've spoken to, I don't know how many thousands of students. Sometimes I almost wish I could become callous. No, that is absolutely not even a word that's in the vocabulary. I have learned to manage it. Okay, what you do, those of us who speak about it, all develop some kind of a strategy for managing it. And what you do is like other traumatic experiences in your life. And there's nobody who gets away without suffering, you know, things that are painful, things that are terrible, things that leave you with a sense of trauma. And what you do is, if you learn to overcome it, is you kind of categorize it somewhere, and you place it in a box, and you go to that box when you need to. It's part of your life, but you don't live in that box. And that's what I've tried to do. And let me share something with you that's in that category. I have a way of working. Excuse me. I have a way of working with students where I find out from the teacher of the group that I'm going to be with what their background is, what they, you know, what they're interested in, and then if they're willing to do that, she gets from them questions. And the basis for the questions is, if you were one-on-one with a Holocaust survivor and you could ask them absolutely anything that you wanted to, what would you ask them? And I have at this point literally thousands of questions. You would be shocked. And why would you be shocked? These questions are so sensitive. They're so deep, they're so profound. They are so empathetic, sympathetic, thoughtful. My problem is not becoming jaded. Okay, what I get from the kids is great hope, and a great sense that if we handle the situation properly, and we is like everybody in this chat room, if we handle the situation properly, and we give these kids what they need to know, if we give them the tools, if we give them the understanding, if we give them a community, that's why I'm here with you tonight. If we give them a community that supports them in this, yeah, they'll know what to do with it. They'll know what to do with it. And I'll tell you something else about that. I go to all kinds of schools. I've been in the fanciest of the private schools. I've been in the toughest of the inner city schools. And you know who the most compassionate kids are? The inner city school kids. They understand. They understand when I talk about trauma, when I talk about loss, when I talk about terrible things happening out on the street, and you have to go out on the street. They know what I'm talking about. When I talk, the first time I used the term, and I know we're a little bit off the subject, but I think it fits. The first time I said to them, I learned how to make myself invisible. All the heads are going up and down. Okay. So no, being callous or jaded. I don't know of a single survivor who would say, oh yeah, oh God, I can't stand this anymore. This is getting old. Doesn't get old. I hope that answers your question.
There's another one here for you.
Okay.
What do you think we need to do to educate our youth to prevent the seed of hatred that fertilized the climate of the Holocaust?
Yeah, I wish I had a really quick answer for you on that, because I don't think there are any quick answers. But I think there are a couple of directions in which to move. One of them is exactly what you're doing tonight, what this organization is doing, which is to provide them with adults who get it. And adults who get it start in the home. They certainly have to be in their schools, and they have to be in the community. They have to be in the community. Because all of these things didn't just pop up overnight. There were seeds that were planted. And one of the seeds that was planted was that it's okay to designate certain people as outcasts, and having designated outcasts, it's okay to punish them, to torture them, to take everything they own, and then to kill them. And that doesn't happen overnight. That is a gradual process. And we've all seen that. We've all seen that somebody, shrugs their shoulders. They see stuff that shouldn't be happening. Yeah, shrug his shoulders. Okay. I mentioned early on when I started talking that a whole new vocabulary had to be created. There was no word for Holocaust. Okay, that was a created word. There was no word for genocide. That was a created word. There are a couple of other words that I think fit right into this. One of them is upstander, and the other is bystander. I don't know if you've ever heard those words, but they are in use in places where they do Holocaust education. And what they signify is people's reaction when they see things going on. And a bystander is somebody who says, what does that have to do with me? Or hey, I might get into real trouble if I get involved with this. I'm not going to do that. And an upstander is somebody who says, wait a minute, I know this is wrong, and I know what needs to happen here. And I'll tell you something. I have such great hope for Bloomfield. Why? I use a cane when I walk, and I almost never open a door for myself. If I'm shopping in Copaco, from somewhere, somebody will come and open a door. And that's somebody who is an upstander, how's she going to open that door? She's carrying a bag with one hand, and she's got a cane in the other hand, and somebody sees that, and I love it. Okay, that's who we are. That's where we live. And I once had the experience where after some surgery I was on crutches, and I had developed what I thought was this really cool technique that I put both crutches under one arm, and then I have a hand to work with. And I was in a school in West Hartford, and I was near the Stop and Shop in West Hartford. I have to tell this story. I know it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And I tried to shop, and I tried to manage my stuff, and I finally left the store, left the cart where it was, left the store, got into my car, and had a good cry. Okay, drove to Bloomfield, drove to the Stop and Shop in Bloomfield, And every place I went, somebody said, "Miss, can I help you? Miss, let me get that for you." Or "You can't reach that," you know, and some guy who was 6 feet tall would say, "Would you like the one with the salt or without the salt?" I mean, it was such a different experience. That is how that's a very long answer to a very reasonable question. But that is how you raise kids, and how you try to steer away from the kind of horrors that happen. One way. Okay, what else have we got?
Kind of along those same lines, what words of encouragement can you offer to encourage unity in the community?
Wow. Keep on keeping on. There's no magic formula. It's we like each other. Learn to focus on the things that we like about each other. I think it was said about the beginning. And I have to tell you, I really am totally. So I will say, I spent the afternoon talking to so and so, so and so, and so and so, and my husband will say, something about what color were they, and I'll say I don't remember, and I really don't. I saw my first Black person in London when I was 8 or 9. I had never seen a Black person before. But I had seen all kinds of people, and I had been exposed. We had traveled a lot in Europe. It's no big deal to go to another country. And I had traveled as a young child, and I was used to people looking different. I was used to people talking different languages. And I came from a family that really had no prejudices. They had many very difficult things happening to them, and they lived with it. And I have a lot of people I don't like. I don't want to come off as goody two shoes here. But people's race or religion or sexual preferences, as was pointed out at the beginning, is not for me at least, not my defining value. It's I care about what you're like, and that I think that's the answer to Bloomfield. It's why we moved to Bloomfield. I wanted my kids in a school where they would be part of the real world, that people don't come in one size, shape, and color. Well, these are getting to be tough questions.
There's a few more.
Okay.
Kind of a twofold question. How did your parents instill resiliency in you? And how did they talk to you about what had happened? And then when you became a parent, how did you talk to your kids about your story and explain that to them?
Wow. Okay. Resiliency. Okay. I have to really think about that, because I was raised, as were most kids in Europe, and in that generation, very strictly. And you talked to adults in a certain way. You were very respectful. You had a schedule, and you were expected to keep that schedule. If you took it out, you put it away. I think I learned to say please and thank you before I learned to say pretty much anything else. You were expected to be quiet when adults were speaking. I mean, it was a very stringent kind of an upbringing. But I was also given early on a lot of independence and the ability to make, unless it was something where I was told what to do, to make my own decisions as to what to do. I think that was one thing. I think the second thing was that I was always given a lot of responsibility. And I'm a great believer, and that also goes for how I raised my kids, that you don't give kids responsibility that they're not equipped to handle. But if you do give them responsibility, you make sure that they have the tools for dealing with it. And you also make sure, and I do this as a teacher and I do this as a principal, and then you make sure if they're going to take it on, you make sure that they do it.
Mm.
And how does that give you resiliency? It creates confidence. Okay. And not everybody agrees with that, but that was, I mean, when I had to function on my own, I had the confidence to do it. And resiliency per se, I think is something that's built a little bit. I think some of that is genetic. I think there are some kids, you know, it's funny, I see that now. And I said I wasn't going to talk about my great grandchildren, but I am. I have four very little ones. And it's so interesting to see how different each baby is from the other. And yeah, there are a couple of them that are more resilient than others. We have one who he's, you know, when I get him on FaceTime, he looks like Winston Churchill on a day when the war was going badly, because something that he was planning on what wasn't working. He's 8 months old, just wasn't working. And it's, you know, and luckily he has a mother who's a child development specialist and she knows how to deal with it, but he's not a resilient baby. So, you know, I think some of that comes with the basic equipment, but I really do think that you can make kids resilient by, you know, as I said before, by giving them the tools to have the ability to judge situations, that they have role models, they have, which, you know, you asked about my parents, right? Lord knows my parents were role models, because they when all of this hit them, they, you know, they never laid down and cried. They just did what had to be done, and started their lives all over again. I'll throw in one more thing. How resilient were they? My mother became, as a result of her experiences, became the immigration worker for Jewish Family Service during the time when the refugees were coming in. This was in the 1940s, that we helped locate, and it was we helped locate people who were coming out of the camps, and reunite them with families here. And then when families brought them to Hartford, my mother was the one who helped resettle them, based, and you know, there was no playbook for that, and there was nothing that they could teach you in social work school about that. It had never happened before, but she knew what to do. She knew what to do because she had survived it, and had been in a situation to help other people, and had gone through all of it. And then you apply it, you use it to help other people. Yeah, that was their resilience. Boy, that was a tough question.
I have a question about a story, and I think I'm going to say this right, but the question is, can you tell us about Gustama?
Tell us about what?
Is that right, Meredith?
I think it's Gustama. Yes, you mentioned Gustama and you said that I can tell that story later.
Okay, now I'm not sure what I said. Can you put it in context? Maybe I'll figure it out.
I think she's asking about Kristallnacht.
Oh,
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please?
oh, yeah. It sounds like, would you be able to talk a little bit more about Kristallnacht?
Oh, Kristallnacht. Okay, sure. Kristallnacht was a very interesting strategy. The story was put out, and maybe there was an incident and maybe there was not, that a crazed 17-year-old Jewish young man whose father had been put to death murdered I believe it was a diplomat, a German diplomat in Paris. The stories changed. It depends on where you read it. It was never really nailed down. And that became the reason for the Nazis to, if you know what a pogrom is a violent planned attack which kills people, which destroys property, which vandalizes, which has, just every imaginable horror attached to it. To create these pogroms in most of the cities in Germany and most of the cities in Austria. And one of the worst Kristallnacht pogroms was in Vienna. And the reason they call it Kristallnacht, and I kind of don't like the term, because crystal in German, crystal is highly valued. Every household has its family crystal. So to call something crystal night is, ooh, that's lovely. And this was anything but lovely. That it began by breaking store windows, looting, pillaging, burning the contents, trucks driving through the street, picking up Jews and taking them to concentration camps, harassing old people, cutting beards off old religious Jews. I mean, it was, nothing was off limits. Nothing was off limits. And I'll tell you my story because it's a good story. When my friend and I went off to school in the morning, the very gray day, it was Thursday, November, 10th of November. And we had no idea that anything was happening other than we saw a lot of uniformed people in the street. As we got closer to where our school was, we began to smell a very unique odor. And the odor was of burning books. Books have a particular odor when they burn. And what they were doing is there were in that neighborhood, there were tons of bookstores. It was a Jewish neighborhood. And they had emptied out all the books and placed them in the streets and were burning them. And they were also burning the contents of Jewish stores. And we didn't know what to do. So we decided probably the best thing to do was just to walk to school as we normally did. And we did. And when we got to the school was surrounded by a mob of screaming, cursing hoodlums. And, we were two little girls, and we just kind of worked our way and went into the school. And I think I had mentioned before about the paving stones coming through the window. And this was like every window in the school was on the lower floors. They couldn't, they're heavy. The trajectory is such that they would only do, but our classroom was on the first floor. And it went on for a little while. And then it was clear that not only was there not going to be any teaching getting done, but that it was a dangerous place to have so many Jewish kids. And they dismissed us two at a time, out a back door into an alleyway. And we again made our way through the mob and got on the trolley car. And by then it had spread to the whole city. And I can smell that smell to this day of things burning. It wasn't a house burning, has a particular smell, but this was like clothing stores being emptied out, and we made our way home. I went into the house. My mother luckily was there. She decided that we needed to go check on my grandparents, who lived about a block away. And which was a crazy thing to do, but we did. So we walked to my grandparents, and I'm telling you this story. It's a good place to show how did people survive. And my grandmother had my grandparents had my aunt and her husband and a new baby, and the new baby was sick, who were living with them. New baby was quite sick. And my grandmother, I have to describe her to you, was a very lovely lady, very gracious, petite, and just a very gentle, very genteel epitome. And as we're in the house and my mother's checking, do they have enough to eat? Do they have the medicines for the baby, or does she have to go get some? And the doorbell rings, and it's two, what they call the SA, which were kind of the ground troops. And they said, you have to vacate your premises immediately and find someplace else to go. And I'm standing next to my grandmother, and I see my grandmother put her hands on her hips, and she says to one of them, you're not going to tell me what to do. I've known you since you were a baby. When your mother was sick, I came to take care of you. I diapered you. And you are now not going to tell me that I have to leave my home. And he stood there and he looked at her and he says, all right, we weren't here. And my grandmother says, okay. That was okay with her. And they went away. I learned a lot from that episode. Now, to finish the story, we walked back home. We saw across the street two Gestapo men. And please don't ask me why. You could tell they were Gestapo. Gestapo means they were the secret police, okay? And what did they all do? They all wore very, very snazzy leather belted raincoats and hats. And they were standing there. And we ran quickly into the house and up into our apartment. My mother locked the door, and it wasn't more than a minute or two. And we hear this unbelievable banging on the door. And they said, we know you're in there. We just saw you go in there. And we're going to break this door down if you don't open it. Okay? Well, my mother was not about to open the door. We stayed like that for 7 hours. 7 hours. I was sitting on the floor on a pillow, moving, as it was a parquet floor, so I could move on the pillow. My mother sat in her chair and knitted for as long as it was light. And once it got dark, we couldn't turn on the light. The telephone kept ringing. mother couldn't answer it, because if she answered it, then they would know that there was somebody in the house. They kept banging on that door, and then we would hear footsteps. And there would be a little break, and then there'd be banging on the door and more footsteps. We didn't know, were they trying to fake us out, or were they really leaving? Finally, at that point, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and the phone's still ringing. My mother's very worried as to what it might be. My father was in prison at that point. And she picked up the phone, and the voice on the other end said, "Don't say a word." She wasn't going to. He said, "Don't say a word. I know you have the Gestapo outside your door. I will wait until they're gone. Put on your hat and coat and be prepared to pin on a swastika." This is what party members wore, a little gold swastika. "And tell your child to do the same thing, and she's also going to get a swastika. And here's the knock that I'm going to use." And he gave her a coded knock. And that's exactly what happened. There was the banging, there was the sound of footsteps, and then there was that knock on the door. And it was a friend of my father's, non-Jewish, a lawyer. And we were dressed. We snuck out very quickly. And I'll never forget this either, and walked through the streets as if we were going out for a lovely little evening stroll. And he and my mother are giving the Heil Hitler greeting to whoever was there. And he was holding my, so I didn't have to, because he knew that I probably wouldn't or couldn't. And I finished the night in bed with his little daughter, and he probably saved our lives. And that's kind of a good story. I'm glad you asked that. It's kind of a good story of was everybody evil? No. There were people.
Miss Ruth, thank you for your heart, your time, your recall, and your memories of your experience. I think that last story is a wonderful way to lead us into our moments in memory of the 6 million men and women and children who were murdered, like you said earlier, just for being Jewish, along with others who lost their lives. Please stand with us, the residents of Bloomfield. Stand with us and join with us as we take this moment of silence. And remember, we must never forget. Just a few moments of silence, please. Thank you so much, community residents. And Ms. Ruth, would you like to share any closing thoughts as you have honored us with this inaugural event that we will continue?
I would. And the thought is one of huge gratitude. I don't know of many other communities where this kind of an event takes place with the kind of wonderful caring and concern for the kind of community that we share. That's a very precious thing. So my thanks to each and every one of you who came out in commemoration of this day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're going to transfer this closing moment to our vice chair, and she's going to give you a little sneak preview of how we're going to continue.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ruth. This was a wonderful, wonderful session, and we so appreciate your sharing so much of yourself with us this evening. I would like to say that we appreciate the value and the strength of storytelling so much. Our group, the Bloomfield Humanities Committee, along with the Wittenberry Historical Society, is getting started on a project that will take the value of storytelling and expand it to provide information about the three main communities that make up the character of Bloomfield: our Jewish community, our African American community, and our West Indian community. So we are partnering with the Wittenberry Historical Society. We are working with Dr. Fiona Vernal out of the University of Connecticut. And in the coming weeks, we'll have more to say about this really exciting project, which we hope will bring storytelling and empathy and unity to our community in Bloomfield that we all love so much.
That sounds like a great project. Yeah.
Thank you. Meredith.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This ceremony was organized by BHC, but we could not have executed it without the support of so many residents and our leaders. As noted earlier, we have Mayor Wong on the line, and we also have State Representative Bobby Gibson. And to be quite transparent and quite honest with you, these are not only our government officials, but these are our community, family, and friends. I personally text our state representative last night and said, you come right over here, because Miss Ruthie says you do a lot of work with her, and you know, we're classmates, so you come on over. And sure enough, he's here. And of course, Mayor Wong is here. This is how the Bloomfield family interacts. And this is the tradition of our legacy that we are commanded to continue. Dr. Martin Luther King stated eloquently in his May 14th, 1958 address to the National Biennial Convention at the American Jewish Congress, "Our unity is born of our common struggles of centuries, not only to rid ourselves of bondage, but to make oppression of any people impossible. Everybody, every human being has the obligation to contribute somehow to this world. Your participation this evening was a contribution to us standing and never forgetting. And we thank you. And we hope that you continue to participate in the activities that the Bloomfield Humanities Committee will continue to be honored to present to help Bloomfield bloom. Thank you, good people, and good night.